Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. One of the things that came up in conversation today with some people was how Buddha Dhamma is not a very consoling religion. It's not very comforting. It doesn't say, don't worry dear, it'll all be alright in the end. It's more that it might be alright, or it might not be alright. And the end might be a very, 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 very long way away. So even just saying those words, you might think, oh. It's something in us feels threatened. You might already be thinking, oh dear, it's going to be one of those Dhamma talks. Yeah, 1.5 minutes in and we're under attack already. So, but that's interesting, isn't it? One of the chants that we regularly do actually occurred to me to finish this evening with is called the 5 Subjects of Frequent Recollection. And you might have noticed these in the chanting book if you've been hungry for something to read, skimming through the chanting book to see if there's anything gripping in there. And then things like the Buddha's teaching on loving kindness, the sharing of blessings. These are all very uplifting and inspiring teachings. And then we read the 5 Subjects of Frequent Recollection. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Then, I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So normally the last one might even be a bit depressing on its own, but after the first 4 it's quite an uplift, isn't it? So it's something in us is threatened by that, or is not pleased by that. We don't want to be reminded of that. Why should I remember I'm of the nature to age, sicken and die, and everything that I love is going to leave me? And I'm depressed enough already. Life is hard. Why do I have to remind myself of this sort of the grim side of it? And so it's easy to read or hear this kind of thing, and agree with people that Buddhism is a pessimistic religion. And certainly in its early days in the West, and even in the time of the Buddha, all through the ages, people have made that kind of criticism, and it was a major fuel of criticism of Buddhism when it was first coming into Britain and Europe, America in the 19th century, because it can seem a pretty nihilistic approach if you take it just at face value. But this is a reflective teaching. There's a purpose that the Buddha had in mind when he's encouraging us to contemplate aging, sickness, death, and loss. Because in Buddhist mythology, what are known as the heavenly messengers, were the things that caused the bodhisattva to leave the home life and to enter upon the spiritual path and to finally realize full enlightenment as a Buddha. And the heavenly messengers if those of you know the story, actually in the scriptures it's told of the Buddha Vipassi in his lifetime, but it sort of over the years has got merged into the life of Gautama Buddha. But that he was sort of lovingly imprisoned in a palace by his father and not allowed to, having heard the predictions that his son would either become a world emperor or a spiritual leader. Dad was definitely not interested in his son becoming a spiritual leader as a warrior noble. This was an embarrassment and a failure to Dad. Those of us who still things haven't changed a huge amount over the centuries. But Dad was very keen that his son was not going to enter upon the spiritual path, so he kept away all the things that were going to or likely to cause that spiritual motivation to arise in his son, so that he was, according to the myth, raised in an environment completely free from old people, sick people, or the dead. Those things were kept from his experience, his whole youth and childhood. And so it was only when he snuck out of the palace and went for a few trips around the city of Kapilavatthu with his charioteer, Channa, and then he saw, first of all, an aged person with bent back and walking along with a walking stick, staggering along the road, and then he asked the Channa, the charioteer, well, what's that? What's happened to that person? He said, oh, that's just an old person. Then. What do you mean old? He said, well, someone who lives a long time. That's what we end up like. Really? All kind of haggard and grey and bent over. I mean, surely there's something terribly, something's gone terribly wrong in this person's life. I said, no, it just happens to everyone. It's all around. And then that was the first heavenly messenger. And then the second one was going out through the town and seeing someone desperately sick, lying by the roadside, sort of lying in their own excrement and kind of covered in sores and incapable of moving and looking after themselves. In desperate state. And again, the Bodhisattva was terribly shocked and distressed and said, what's wrong with this person? Oh, they're sick. Sick? What does sick mean? What is sick? Well, the body kind of not working properly and feeling pain and breaking down and filled with all kinds of trouble and difficulty. Well, is that just a rare thing? Oh, no, it happens to everyone. And then the third one was when the Bodhisattva went out and saw a funeral procession, and this completely immobile body wrapped up in cloth being carried on a bier through the town, and everyone kind of weeping and wailing and crying, and a whole funeral procession going on. And again asking, well, what's that? What's happened to that person? He said, oh, well, she's died. It's a dead person. Well, what does dead mean? Well, not alive, no longer living. The life force is exhausted. It's all over. But they're no longer alive or able to speak or talk or feel. They're dead. And so, as the story goes, he was terribly struck and distressed by this news that this could happen to people. And then, finally, on the fourth excursion, then he saw a wandering mendicant, a yogi, a samana, a sort of lean ascetic type with a rag robe and sitting meditating under a tree. And so he asked Channa, well, what is that? Who is that? And he said, oh, that's the samana. That's the one who's on the religious path. He's one who's seeking the liberation from birth and death. So, is that just a unique thing that he's doing? So, no, all kinds of people do that. So is that possible for everyone? So, they say so. That it is possible to be liberated from birth and death. That can be done. So those, in Buddhism, those are known as the four heavenly messengers. So these are taken as being kind of wonderful and marvelous presences. Without the shocks of the system, then there would not have been that impulse to to leave the home life and to enter upon the religious quest. So we might be thinking already, well, I'd rather not have those messengers visit me. Thank you very much. But the reason why we contemplate those things, or bring them up deliberately, the 5 subjects of frequent recollection, we recollect the heavenly messengers, is to help encourage that awakening, and not because we're trying to make ourselves feel depressed, or say make ourselves dwell upon the negative aspects of life, but rather we're trying to bring attention to what is already the case. Right? That we have already aged ever since this retreat began. We're all now 3 or 4 days older, and as I've been reflecting, I feel a bit like Rip Van Winkle coming back to Amaravati after sort of being away and having not led a retreat here for 10 years. Many faces. It's like, do I know him? Didn't I see him somewhere before? Like, gone to sleep for 100 years and waking up, and like Rip Van Winkle, just kind of, who are these people? Have I been here before? This looks vaguely familiar. So time passes by. The body is subject to sickness and to aging and to death, and so that the reason why that we feel that sense of shock, or like, oh dear, this is depressing, or I don't want to hear that, I want to skip over that chant. I like the kind of Brahma Viharas, the loving kindness, compassion, joy, great stuff. And I'm not making fun of that. It's just like, isn't that? But that noticing what happens when we see that, when we read of those qualities, we reflect on them. There's an uplift. There's something that it rejoices in that. But when we bring to mind sickness, aging, death, loss, then there's something in us is threatened, is shocked, doesn't want to hear that. So the reason why we bring them up is because of that sense of shock or that sense of threat. Because these are already the case, that they're already on this, gathered in this room all together. I mean, there's numbers of us I know who have serious ailments, cancer and chronic arthritis and lymphoma and Parkinson's disease, and all kinds of things that are major serious ailments. And even if on a minor level, how many coughs and sneezes, how many gallons of mucus have been shifted in the last 3 or 4 days. This is part of the package. This is the small print that we didn't read before we signed up for this. So the reason why we bring it to mind and reflect on these elements is because this is already the case. It's already the case that the body is aging. It's already the case that every single one of us is going to die. Think, this is getting really depressing. But isn't that the fact? In 100 years' time, put your hand up if you're sure that you're going to be alive. Maybe you'll be back in there'll be a slightly smaller version with a few modulations. Might have come back in, but with this life continuing in 100 years' time, what's gathered now in this room, the elements of fire, water, earth, and air of our bodies will be scattered to the corners of the earth, and buried and turned into ash and smoke and wafted all over the planet and carried around the oceans, merged into the earth and the creatures. And that's not a fantasy, is it? that's fact, scientific fact in all likelihood. So what we're doing is just opening the heart to what is already the case, and that there's a kind of climbing over that feeling of threat or shock or rejection, isn't there? It's like, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to know that. I don't want to be with that. So that what that which is being climbed over is the instinctual sort of defenses that we have, the instinctual rejection, the fear of death, the fear of sickness, the fear of aging. These are powerful instinctual forces. They're the things that kept us alive. Our ancestors, who were not afraid of death, got eaten. Right? Way back in the evolutionary tree, the ones that said, "Oh, fine, saber-toothed tiger, great, hello, good morning." It was the ones that sort of smells like tiger. Get out of here. We are the offspring of those ones. The ones who were not afraid got eaten, or fell off a cliff or whatever. So that it's entirely natural for us to feel afraid of death, to be repelled by death, by sickness, by aging and so forth. But that is as a huge biological force within our nature on a cellular level that impels us to deny the fact of death and to get away from it, to not dwell on it. Just in the way that we talk about it. It's like, if anything should ever happen to me. Right? Ever heard that kind of phrase? We don't say, when I die. Well, maybe amongst Buddhists you do. Amaravati, so over the dishes, doing the washing up, you'll have conversations like that. But in most ordinary English households, even if they get that far to say, if anything should ever happen to me, we can't say, when I die. It's like we've got to sort of fend it off with a few conditionals and euphemisms, right? It's not polite to talk about dying. So that there's that instinctual sort of rejection and denial and pushing away. It's completely natural, but it's also not helpful, because what comes about is that if we are convinced by the instinctual defense systems of thinking that I've got the right to be healthy and comfortable and content and live a pain-free old age with no embarrassing ailments, no kind of breakdowns, shortages or leakages of any kind, and then I can just happily pop off in my sleep at 95, surrounded by my friends and all my offspring who've grown up, all being healthy and happy and equally comfortable and content. It's like, already you think, oh, come on, dream on. It's not in this universe. But even though we don't think it through, that's the kind of thing that we assume or look forward to or think somehow is our right. It's not unreasonable to expect that. But as soon as we start to think it through, well, we don't like to think it through, but when we do, then we begin to see how farcical that kind of model is. When we just do the statistics, how many of us have worked in hospitals, or in how many people in our families have got painful ailments, or how many of our relatives, friends, loved ones have died young or been stricken with different diseases, kind of chronic illnesses and disabilities. So something in us is, even though it's everywhere around us and the whole natural world is built this way, something in us still feels, oh, that's not fair, or that's not right, or if only it wasn't that way, or why did this happen to me, or it shouldn't be this way. How can someone so young? How can someone be born with such a horrible illness? Or how can I'm so young? How can this be happening to me? And it's a natural enough feeling. But the reason why we bring up these kind of contemplations is to recognize that from the very beginning, this is the structure of things. That that the cause of death is birth. It's not cancer or emphysema or a car crash. Because we're born, the whole biological system is extraordinarily complicated. Intrinsic in that is the fact that these bodies have to come to an end. Years ago, I did a degree in physiology, And after 3 years, after I graduated, I came to the conclusion it can't work. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind this thing is too complicated. It can't possibly do what it does. I mean, it's even not even getting up in the morning, even to move one muscle, to bend a finger is like a flat-out miracle. You know, what it takes for a muscle to contract is amazing sequence of extraordinary kind of biochemical relationships, connections. It's amazing, incredible. And I remember studying muscle contractions. This is too amazing. This can't possibly work. And just kind of walking through the whole thing, so the entire sequence of elements that need to be there just to bend your finger, and then I see someone walking down the corridor. I think, what? or watching someone doing a pole vault. Like, it can't possibly be done. It's too complicated. There's too many things to go wrong. In any one moment, there's like billions of chemical reactions that have to work properly, perfectly. I remember I had this immunology professor called Ivan Reut. He was one of the few university lecturers I had that actually delighted in the fact that they didn't understand everything. And I remember one time he was describing this particular immunological sequence of about 9 or 10 different reactions. And I remember him saying, well, we know how, numbers 1 to 5 work, and we certainly figured out 7 to 10, but how you get from 5 to 7, we haven't got a clue. And in fact, the only way we can figure out how that could be done should be at 200 atmospheres pressure and at about 150 degrees centigrade. And even then, it should take a couple of hours for that reaction to work. But our bodies do it, in tenths of a second, several times every minute. And it can't be done, with a big grin on his face. So when we begin to contemplate how the body works and how the natural order works, we begin to see it's no surprise that the thing doesn't hold together in a perfect fashion all the time. It's completely normal for it to break down. Sickness is, in fact, the norm. And so what we begin to see is the Buddha is far from trying to make us more depressed with these kind of reflections. It's to open us up to the fact of the way life works and what makes up our life as a human being and what we're in the midst of, and to recognize this is the fact, and to not be fooled by those kind of strange irrational defense systems that seem to think that I have the right to go through life completely comfortable, pain-free, without ailments, and that all of my loved ones do too. It's completely bizarre. But that's the way that we tend to function. And also that somehow we go through life also convinced that we're never going to die. There's a wonderful passage in the Mahabharata where I believe it's where the 5 Pandava brothers, they've all been, or 4 of them have been knocked out by this strange mysterious mist. And there's one Pandava is left standing, and then his voice is appearing out of the mist and pounding him with questions. And he has to get all the answers right, otherwise they're all going to die. And so, and there's this whole long list of strange philosophical questions that's appearing out of the mist over this lake. And then one of the questions is, what is the most strange and marvelous thing in the world? And the prince replies, the most strange and marvelous thing in the world is that every single one of us is going to die, and we all think that it won't happen to us. Right answer. There's also, in a kind of slightly different tone, there's a wonderful passage in a Kurt Vonnegut novel. He used to come up with these little beings from a planet called Tralfamadore. The Tralfamadorians have a lifespan of about 30 or 50,000 human years. And one of these Tralfamadorians gets shipwrecked on planet Earth, and he's trying to send back sort of a message to his home planet. Please send a new distributor. And anyway, in the news that this little Tralfamadorian sends back to the planet Tralfamador is the really amazing thing is that these humans have such an incredibly brief lifespan. Just like barely, not even 100 years. I mean, and yet they carry on. They kind of get up in the morning and they chat with each other and they go about their lives, as if they were going to live for 30,000 years, just like us. They don't realize that it's all going to be over by nightfall. You'd think they'd be a little bit more urgent about what they did with their day. But they seem to just kind of loaf around and have a good time just like we do. that kind of thing. So the Buddha's instruction is also trying to encourage us to a sense of urgency in getting our priorities a little bit clearer. And seeing what do we fill our days with? What are our preoccupations? What are the important things on our list? A number of years ago, 96, 8 years ago, 96, I was diagnosed with melanoma. So I had this mole taken off and sent to the lab. And the previous year, one of our friends in San Francisco had also been diagnosed with melanoma. And she was originally told it was recurrent and she only had like 7 months to live. As it turned out, the lab diagnosis was wrong. And it was just, she got it for the first time. But melanoma is a kind of skin cancer that if it recurs, then it's almost certainly fatal. If you get it the first time, then you can prevent it coming back. Then you can live for a long time. But anyway, so I had been diagnosed with melanoma. The dermatologist had taken one look. He said, "Okay, let's see what you got." And in one fluid motion, he'd seen this errant mole, and without sort of breaking stride, he'd kind of said, "Lie down," and started reaching for the syringe and the scalpel. It was like kind of that obvious that it needed treatment. So they sent it off to the lab to find out how advanced this was. And I'd already had the kind of melanoma talk from this friend of mine in San Francisco. So I knew this could either be something fairly minor and no big thing, or it could be, better start sending out postcards. And because I knew she'd had that same sort of diagnosis, you're not going to live till Christmas. So it was a week between the time I had the initial diagnosis and the report came back from the lab, and that was a very interesting week. Buddhist interesting, capital I, because it could be no problem, everything's going to be okay, or you're going to be dead by Christmas. So the most prominent thing that happened was my list of things to do had a radical shake-up. Not that I even sort of had to think about it, but it was just certain things just fell off the list, very, very rapidly. And as it was, I won't keep you guessing. I mean, I'm still here. So as it came back, it was not terribly advanced, but I still have a whole regime I have to keep, sort of keeping out of the sun. So I have to wear sun hats and sunscreen and all that sort of stuff. So I have a little regime I have to keep, but otherwise everything was okay. But what was really striking was that how certain things just completely dropped off the list, and other things sort of hopped to the top of the list. And then you realize, all these years, I've been a monk. I'm kind of teaching Dhamma and training people, and I give Dhamma talks about this stuff all the time. And suddenly it's like, oh, right. Right. Yes. They're using real bullets here. These are not blanks. Okay. So that sort of shift from the theoretical, sort of giving long, instructive, eloquent discourses about impermanence and not self. Suddenly, boom. Here it is. So what you find these teachings are about aging, sickness, death, loss. What they're aimed at is really the habits of identification that we have with the body and with our life, with our personality, all that we think of as me and mine. So that as we've been looking at a lot and then investigating, and I've been talking about repeatedly during these few days together, that these are potent teachings to help us reflect on the ownerlessness and the impermanence, the uncertainty of the body, the personality, the things that we think of as me and mine. And that these recollections of about aging, sickness, death, loss, these are in a way another angle aiming at that identification with the body, with the personality, all these things that we think of as mine, who and what I am. And even though we can theoretically think, oh yes, the body is not self, and sitting here in meditation, oh yes, I can sense that that feeling of the cloth on my skin is not self, or I can oh yes, the sensation of the rain on my skin, that's just a sensation, it's not self. But then suddenly it's like you get a fatal diagnosis, or someone close to you is stricken with an illness, or we contemplate our own death, and suddenly it seems to be in a completely different category. Or as people often describe, when they might be totally at home with the idea of aging, sickness, and death, but when the aeroplane starts to wobble, when you see the cabin crew go ashen and start running down the aisle, what happens to the I'm of the nature to age, I'm of the nature to sick. Hang on a minute, I was totally at ease with this in the shrine room. So the reason why we contemplate these and bring them to life is so that we become we really let it come home, so that we are doing the best we can to see that aging, sickness, death, loss of this body and those close to us, those that we love, and all beings. This is not anything going wrong. There's nothing out of order. This is the very uncertainty of the universe that is present all the time. And so that kind of an openness of heart, kind of a climbing over that defensiveness, is really what these teachings are about. To be able to say, this body and these, my friends, my children, my parents, this too, this all is part of the same experience. It's part of the same system. It's all part of the same order. Our sickness, our aging, our death, our loss does not signal that anything has gone wrong with life, or anything is unfair. Have we ever had that experience of feeling it's not fair? Right? It shouldn't happen. Why me? This isn't fair. But when we really allow that in and think and contemplate what we're saying, we realize, well, it's not fair according to my value system or my preferences or my expectations, but in terms of the laws of nature, how could it not be fair? Why should this body be specially protected, or the ones that are close to this life, or me or mine, why should that be specially protected? So we're trying to use these kind of contemplations to come to this this attitude, or this way of viewing things that really knows anicca, really knows impermanence and not self, as a continual, ongoing way of seeing. So just as we're talking about mindfulness and heedfulness and having that as an ongoing quality, that's not just paying attention to the perceptions that we have, but also just seeing things through the eyes of anicca, dukkha, anatta. One of Ajahn Chah's little dictums that he used to say was, he would say, the Buddha said, one who sees me sees the Dhamma, one who sees the Dhamma sees me. And what is the Dhamma? The Dhamma is the truth of uncertainty, of anicca. So one who sees anicca, one who sees the truth of uncertainty sees the Buddha. And he would sort of pull that all together by saying, the Buddha is uncertainty. The mind which knows uncertainty is the Buddha mind. Which doesn't mean to say if you've got an anxiety problem, it means you're a fully enlightened Buddha. I'm uncertain, that means I must be a Buddha. No, it's... No. It means that mind which is able to contemplate, oh yeah, you don't know, it's not certain, we're not sure. That is ready to let go of the predictions of being alive tomorrow. That our health will stay together. That our loved ones are still with us. I mean, I don't want to get too threatening, but you might have said goodbye to your spouse when you came onto retreat. We don't know if they're still there. Or maybe you think you parked even maybe less tender. You parked your car out front. Are you sure? Are you sure it's still there? We don't know. Just before Christmas, at Abhayagiri, a young woman came to stay with us. Very kind of bright, vibrant young Indian woman, lived in New York City, and she was doing a master's degree in English literature, and her day job was working for American Express, and she saved up taken some time off from work, actually lost wages to come out. She'd found Abhayagiri Monastery on the website, on the internet, and flown all the way out to California to spend 5 or 6 days with us. And she was a very, very lovely person, very bright and kind of keen-minded and very interested in meditation. Her parents were not particularly spiritually inclined, so she was a bit of a strange case in her family. But she was really interested in developing meditation and yoga and so forth. And so she found out I was going to be co-leading a yoga and meditation retreat in the springtime in New York, and she was all fired up to do that. And so just before Christmas, she went back home. And then in early January, we got a call from her mother saying that she died. I thought, oh dear, because I knew that she used to commute from the home in the Bronx into New York, and I thought, oh dear, some nut must have attacked her on the train, or she must have had some kind of terrible accident. And then when I talked to her mother, because she'd been over at Abhayagiri just recently, her mother sort of wanted to talk with us to sort of see what her stay had been like and how things had been. And she said that she wasn't attacked or didn't have an accident, but on New Year's Eve she'd gone to work. She was in perfect health, and her mother had said that every year around about New Year's time she would tend to have some kind of illness or she'd have some sort of accident or some sort of near miss, and so her mother was getting nervous about her safety, and so she said she rang her up at work at 3 PM and said, "I'm worried about you. Can you come home?" And she said, "Oh, I'm fine, Mom. But if you're really anxious, I'll come back." And so her mother said, when she talked to her on the phone, she was fine. That's at 3 PM. Shortly after the phone call, she started feeling ill. She collapsed at work and was taken into the hospital. Died the next day. Had bacterial meningitis. Just gone. So perfect health in the morning and dead the next day. So that was amazing shock. That again, you contemplate this and you give Dhamma talks about it. And then suddenly, in your, someone from in your midst who is kind of so completely alive, sort of very bright, vibrant being, suddenly just one little bug and bacterial meningitis. I did some reading up about it. It's just the Streptococcus bacterium. That it doesn't probably 20% of us in this room have got that within us right now. Just the ordinary sore throat bacteria. But if it migrates from the throat area into the brain, then it can just easily cause meningitis, and then and then take you out very, very quickly. So I'm not trying to be threatening, even though I am being threatening. But it's like, this is why these recollections are like, what do we want to do with our life? What are the priorities? What am I dwelling upon? What am my thoughts preoccupied with? You know, do I really need to know what the recipe for that that thing was that we had yesterday? My plans for the house renovations after I get back from the retreat. It's not that we all have a sword of Damocles hanging over us, but just bearing that in mind. What is important to us? So these are ways that we, the Buddha encouraged us to sort of shake up our priority list to see, okay, well, life is fragile. So where can we find a refuge? What is important? What's useful to us? And so that these are all encouragements and ways to help us, in a way, loosen that identification with the body, with the personality, Sakkaya Ditthi, the personality view. And that we find that when we use this kind of practices that we've been describing, development of insight into anicca, dukkha, anatta, then we begin to genuinely hold our lives and the lives of others in a slightly different way. I was also today I was reminded of a man I met about 20 years ago called John Nightingale, who was in a hospital in Cambridge, Addenbrooke's Hospital, and he had motor neurone disease. And he was one of the happiest people I'd ever met. He was he'd been a vigorous kind of athletic guy. He'd been a paratrooper before, and in his earlier life, and he was had been a builder. And suddenly he got motor neurone disease, and it was just sort of what happens is the body becomes paralyzed in the extremities, sort of back to the trunk of the body and the chest. And he was paralyzed from the neck down. So he's sort of dead from the neck down, and he could communicate. He had a champagne cork in his mouth with a knitting needle poked into it and a letterboard, and he would spell out what he wanted to say through his knitting needle. And he was genuinely one of the happiest people I'd ever met. It was quite amazing to be with him. He had these extraordinary, sparkly eyes, even though his body was a complete wreck. And I remember Ajahn Sujito and I went to visit him, and what was really striking was that as he was spelling out some of his story and what was happening to him, he said, "It may sound peculiar, but this is the best thing that's ever happened to me." He said, if I hadn't had this illness, nothing would ever have stopped me. I was always so busy with my life and doing stuff that I never would have understood what life was really about. And then he lifted up his knitting needle and sort of pointed it round the ward at the doctors and the nurses, and he says, "I feel really sorry for those people." He was being absolutely genuine. He says, "Look at them. They're completely filled with all that kind of game playing and and sort of power games and flirtations and ego trips and he says, it may sound stupid, but I feel I've got the laugh on them." And then and he really meant it. That he felt sorry for all these people bouncing around with all their limbs working, kind of chatting with each other, and being the sort of the proud doctor with the white coat and the stethoscope, and the kind of young busy nurse, and ever so efficient. And he was genuinely sad because they don't realize what's really important in life. And it was amazing that he had genuinely been able to use that stoppedness to reflect. He said, "But don't get the idea it was like this." He said, "I spent the first year just seething with anger and resentment, but it took me a long time to get to this point." He says, "Now, I feel really grateful because he's really seen that the body is not self. He says, this isn't it, is it? This is not the whole story. The body isn't it. All these things that we kind of worship and chase after in life, it's really not worth that much, is it? And he said, it's the heart that matters. That's the only thing that's really significant. So it's a bit of an extreme example, and so part of the purpose of a retreat is a sort of a temporary disability. One of our friends in the States is a quadriplegic, so he calls his chair his Vinaya on wheels. Sort of, he and I became a novice at the same time he had his accident and got injured. So we got ordained at the same time. But in the same way, it took him many, many years of resentment and indignation and rage to be able to use his limitation as a way to promote the quality of insight. So this is really why we use the limitations of a retreat and the precepts. We kind of deliberately put these limitations on our activity, on the freedom of what we can do and not do, so that we are like the attention, our effort is forced into the the one outlet that we've got, which is where we can find freedom, because you can't chat to people, you can't read the newspaper, you can't listen to the radio. The only way we can find freedom is through mindfulness and wisdom, through finding that in us which is truly liberated and awake, that which is already free, that quality of unconditioned Dhamma, the unconditioned mind, the asankata Dhamma, that is already here. That's what the Buddha's teaching and these encouragements, these reflections on aging and loss and death are trying to point us to, is that when we let go of identification with what we're not, then the reality is revealed. It's through our mistaken identification with the body and the personality that we and sort of settling for the minor freedoms and flexibilities that we can find there, that we miss the great freedom that is there underlying the whole thing, but we don't see it, we don't realize it's there. And so hopefully we can use the practice and the teachings to awaken to that without having to be sort of kind of on our deathbed or slammed by some painful and difficult disease that forces us to awaken. And ideally that's what we can do, that we use these teachings and practice and the discipline of meditation to, even while we have sort of health and vigor, to wake up to that fundamental quality. And there can be, maybe the last thing to say, there can be all kinds of ways in which, I've talked about some of the ways in which we defend ourselves against those sort of painful realities of life. But there can be other ways too, that we just don't realize, where we're sort of protecting ourselves. One story that I've told a few different people in the interviews I thought might be helpful to share as and again in a way it relates to some of the practices I've been talking about, particularly in terms of making clear the sort of undercurrents of feeling or attitude. So and in the way that the Buddha encourages us reflection on I'm of the nature to age and so forth, that we don't necessarily want to see that face in them that looks out at us in the mirror. It's like, oh dear. That we don't want to think that, but then just to be able to say, I am of the nature to age. So some of the practices I've been talking about, like stating and naming to ourselves, and naming thinking the unthinkable, naming what it is that we're feeling. Some months ago, I was invited to to co-lead a retreat at a new monastery. Some friends of ours in the Zen tradition had opened up a new monastery in Oregon, and they'd asked if I would co-lead a retreat with them as a sort of way of launching their new place. So I agreed to that and had to set off from Abhayagiri early in the morning and to catch the plane. So it was about 5:30 in the morning, and I had that fatal thought, oh, I should just check the email before I set off, just in case anything important's come in. And of course, there was one fresh email in that was someone who was extremely upset with me, very angry. They were something that I had done or said they felt was really hurtful and wrong and bad, and they were upset and they were really troubled and ill at ease, and it was all my fault. So they're angry, upset, and it's I'm angry, upset, and I can't find any peace, and it's your fault. Not exactly phrased like that, but effectively. And so the car is outside with the engine running. Oh dear. So all I could do was just switch off the machine and go and get in the car. So I went off to this retreat, and then for the first 3 or 4 days, and many times during the day, there's sort of this feeling of sort of regret and anxiety and sort of wondering what to say or what to do, or feeling this other person's upset and their kind of anger with me, and trying to spread loving kindness. May they be at peace, may they be happy, may they be at ease, may they find freedom from suffering, in all of the usual loving kindness things, all those good Buddhist practices. And so this is as a retreat, so there's a lot of hours of formal practice during the day. And so on about the 4th day, it was one of those insights, that sort of, they hit you when you look in the wrong way. Sort of one of those ones. You're looking at something else, and it sort of arrives and lands on you while you're not paying attention. And it suddenly hit me, the realization of, I want them to be happy so that they will stop hassling me. And I thought, oh, that's pretty shallow. I'd never think a thing like that. But I knew it was absolutely true. And it was so clear that actually the actual feelings of the person hadn't even made it into the room. I didn't actually care about them at all. What I cared about was me. That I want you to be happy so that I will not be hassled. Because that's bad. I don't like being hassled. I don't like being harassed. That's bad. Shouldn't be. This is not good. And so I used this kind of practice. I could see there was something that didn't want that attack, or was frightened, that was afraid of that feeling of being attacked, assailed by, or feeling someone's anger towards me, and that there was something that was fragile and vulnerable that couldn't bear that, or didn't want to allow that in, that was rejecting that. So I used this kind of practice of stating to myself that very thought. So during the next meditation period, when my mind was focused, I deliberately brought up that thought. I want you to be at peace so that you'll stop harassing me. That's what I want. I wish you were happy, then you'd leave me alone. And that would be good. Just articulating that sort of extraordinarily shallow and selfish kind of childish feeling. And one of the reasons I wanted to sort of bring it up was what I only had to do it literally a couple of times. I did it about twice over, and suddenly that feeling of sort of fear and threat and so forth that had been coming up, almost several, not exactly every minute, but many times an hour for the previous 4 days, suddenly just evaporated, just disappeared. As soon as I really articulated that thought, and then what came forth from that was then the sense of of the heart kind of opening to the fact of that and realizing, well, that's pretty shallow and selfish. And not even spelling it out in those words, but realizing the picture is really bigger than that. And actually, I can deal with being harassed. Why do I have to have everyone like me? Why should I be the one person on planet Earth that everybody likes? Pretty unlikely, isn't it? I'm the only one that everyone on the planet likes all the time. And that, well, if they want to be upset and harass me, and then that's okay. I can deal with that. That's not that bad of a thing to live with. I can cope with that. But what I'd really like is actually for them to be at ease with themselves, regardless of what I'm on the receiving end of, irrespective of that. I would dearly like for them to be at peace and to find contentment and ease for their own sake. And whether I get hassled or not is beside the point. And it had such a quality of genuineness to it. I could quite clearly feel. In fact, I had the thought, even if they want to harass me for the rest of my life or next 1,000 lifetimes, fine. I really don't care. That's fine. But I would just, whatever can be done to enable them to be at peace, that will be a wonderful thing, because I could suddenly, they'd actually got into the room, as it were, and I could feel the painfulness, the kind of anguish in that person's heart, that they would be so caught up and entangled in that way. And there was a genuine sense of compassion. Before, it was more kind of theoretical compassion, self-defensive compassion, and that actually hadn't really met the other person at all. And so it was a very powerful example of the power of bringing that kind of reflection up, so that if you find that you are frightened of sickness, or you're frightened of death, or frightened of losing your loved ones, or whatever it might be, then to use this kind of reflection, not just sort of when we all chant it together in this kind of single voice. And by the way, I'm very impressed with the quality of chanting on this retreat. Very striking, powerful, unified voices we have. But it's not just a matter of bringing it up while we chant, but actually allowing that in during the meditation. I am of the nature to age. I am of the nature to sicken. I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated. And when we really allow that in, what it reveals is that the kind of currents of resentment about, I don't want to bother with this bloody sunscreen for the rest of my life. I don't want to have this arthritic hips, or I don't like having this or that ailment. I don't want to be seen as an old person. Whatever it might be is our own sort of pet peeve, or our own ailment of choice. But what we're burdened by, just to allow that in and say that's the nature of it. To give it a voice, and then we find that it's by making it clear that this is the nature of it. This is what happens. Then, in that very clarifying of it, that highlighting of it, then there's this intuitive sense for a genuine intuition and insight into the fact, the universe is bigger than this. The universe is not just my sick body. It's not just the fact that I lost my loved one. It's not the fact that I made that dreadful mistake 30 years ago. There's more to it than that. And it's not just the brain trying to convince us of that or make us feel okay. It's like there's a deep and direct knowledge of that, a liberating knowledge. There's vidya, a true knowing. And this is one of the great blessings, when we let go of sakaya ditthi, of that identification with the body, with the personality. When there's a releasing of that, then there's that awakening to Dhamma, what is bigger than all of those conditions of birth and aging and so forth. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening. so not to disappoint you. Grief for the loss of a promised chant. We can do the